The UK economy grew by just 0.1% in the third quarter of 2025, and then 0.1% again in the fourth quarter. The Office for National Statistics confirmed both of those figures, and while the government keeps insisting we are not technically in a recession, unemployment has already climbed to 5%. Youth unemployment just hit its highest level since 2015, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development slashed its forecast for UK growth in 2026 from 1.2% all the way down to 0.8%. That is not a healthy economy. That is an economy limping forward on one leg, hoping nothing trips it up. Now, the government will point to Q1 of 2026 bouncing back to 0.6% growth and say, look, things are improving. Fair enough. But 1 quarter of modest recovery does not erase what is underneath. The payrolled employment figures show a fall of around 104,000 jobs in the year to March 2026. Nearly 1 million 16 to 24-year-olds were classified as not in education, employment or training in the third quarter of 2025, close to the highest figure since those records began. Consumer spending is being quietly squeezed from multiple directions at once. That is not the picture of an economy that has found its footing. The problem is that national averages lump everyone together. And when you zoom in, the situation in many local areas is far worse than the headlines make it seem. When the economy slows, it does not slow down equally everywhere. It hits the cities that were already struggling, the ones that never fully recovered from the last crisis, the ones where the high street is already half empty, where the council is already borrowing money just to keep the lights on, where young people are choosing to leave rather than stay. Those are the cities that do not just slow down when a recession hits, they fall, and they fall fast. So today, we are going through 10 of them. Based on verified data from the Office for National Statistics, the Centre for Cities Research Organisation, the Institute for Government, and official government publications, including the English Indices of Deprivation 2025. These are the cities that the numbers say are most exposed right now, and some of them will genuinely surprise you. Number 1. Blackpool. Let us start with the one that sits at the very top of every deprivation index in the country and has done for years. Blackpool is officially the most deprived local authority in England according to the English Indices of Deprivation. Not one of the worst, the worst. 8 of the 10 most deprived neighbourhoods in all of England are inside Blackpool's boundaries. Think about that. Of the 10 most deprived small areas in the entire country, 8 of them are in a single Lancashire seaside town with a population of around 150,000 people. The claimant count, which measures people claiming unemployment-related benefits, sits at 6.3% against a national average of 4.1%. The employment rate is 65.3% versus 75.5% for the UK as a whole. The economic inactivity rate is 30.8%, meaning almost a third of working-age adults are out of the labour market entirely. 17.1% of households in Blackpool were in fuel poverty in 2023. Walk down the town centre and the retail vacancy rate tells its own story. Roughly 1 in 6 shops is empty. When a recession pushes through another wave of chain closures on top of the ones that have already come, Blackpool has almost no buffer left to absorb it. Number 2. Bradford. Bradford might actually be the most urgent financial story on this list. This is a city whose council came within a hair's width of issuing a Section 114 notice, which is the formal mechanism where a local authority's chief finance officer declares the council cannot lawfully balance its books. They did not issue one, but only because the government stepped in with £127 million of exceptional financial support in 2024 to 2025, then another £78 million the following year. Bradford was also allowed a council tax rise of 9.99% without needing a local referendum, the largest in Yorkshire. The council leader had publicly warned of a structural funding gap of £120 million.
Over the last 10-15 years in Bradford, we saw massive cuts to council funding from national government, £350 million, and that meant that council tax had to increase, whilst all that money went back to government and they didn't spend it on Bradford anymore. Because the amount of money we can raise through council tax is far smaller than anything government used to give us.
And the Children and Families Trust alone was forecast to overspend by £49 million in 2024 to 2025. And the High Street reflects the same pressure building underneath. Bradford's city centre vacancy rate is 18%, second only to Newport in Wales. The Centre for Cities report from July 2025 shows Bradford losing nearly 5% of its high street spending to Leeds every single year. Money is draining out of the city economy, council costs keep rising, and the margin for error, if the wider economy worsens, is essentially zero. Bradford is not collapsing today, but its position is about as fragile as it gets. Number 3. Birmingham. You probably already know this one. Birmingham City Council issued its Section 114 notice in September 2023, making it the largest local authority in Europe to formally declare it could not balance its books.
Anybody who's suffering across the city, anything that impacts and that the council has done wrong, we'll hold up our hands and we will say sorry for.
The in-year gap was £87 million. There was a £760 million equal pay liability sitting on the books. The government had to issue a £1.255 billion capitalisation direction. In plain English, that is special permission for the council to borrow money to cover day-to-day spending, which is normally illegal for a local authority. The 2024 to 2025 budget required cutting £149 million of services and planning to sell £750 million of council assets just to get through the year. The wider regional economy adds to the fragility. West Midlands gross value added per head sits at roughly £25,700, around £7,500 below the UK average. Then in 2025, the region took another body blow when the JLR cyber attack was classified by the Cyber Monitoring Centre as the most economically damaging cyber event in UK history, with a central estimated loss of £1.9 billion, affecting more than 5,000 organisations across the region. Birmingham was already on a narrow recovery path. That hit made it narrower. Number 4. Middlesbrough. Here is one that does not make the front pages often enough, but absolutely should. Middlesbrough is the second most deprived local authority in England on the 2025 Deprivation Index, having climbed from 5th place in 2019. It moved in the wrong direction over 6 years, deeper into deprivation, not out of it. The council is on exceptional financial support. 79% of its entire net revenue budget is consumed by adult and children's social care before a single other service is funded. Newport Ward in Middlesbrough, not to be confused with the Welsh city of Newport, has the highest child poverty rate of any ward in England. Centre for Cities call out Middlesbrough alongside Newport and Wigan as cities with over twice the retail floor space per person compared to Brighton or Liverpool. Too many shops, not enough shoppers, not enough money in local pockets to fill them. That combination does not improve by itself in a downturn, because downturns reduce spending first in exactly the communities that can least afford to cut back. The council has very little capacity to invest its way out of that, and the government support keeping it going is a finite resource. Number 5. Stoke-on-Trent. Stoke is another city on the exceptional financial support list. As of February 2024, the government had approved that support for 18 local authorities to avoid hitting Section 114, and Stoke was one of them. The claimant count in Stoke stood at 6.4% in September 2024, against a UK average of 4.4% at the time. That is a significant gap, and it did not emerge overnight. In March 2025, Stoke's MP Alison Gardner told the House of Commons directly that 4.7% of working-age adults in the city were unemployed in the year to September 2024, and that the bigger hidden problem was economic inactivity driven by poor health. 49.1% of the economically inactive in Stoke are long-term sick, nearly half. That is not a problem you solve with a business grant or a regeneration scheme. That represents decades of underinvestment in the health and well-being of a population, and it does not reverse quickly. City centre retail vacancy is 16.3%. The council is financially dependent on government support. Stoke enters any recession from a position of deep structural vulnerability. Number 6. Newport. Newport is probably the starkest high street story in the entire country right now, and the numbers are not even close. The Centre for Cities Vacancy Study from July 2025 put Newport's city centre retail vacancy rate at 19%. That is the highest figure of all 63 cities in their national study. 1 in 5 shops in Newport town centre is currently sitting empty. The same report shows Newport losing nearly 5% of its total high street spending to Cardiff every year. Shoppers who have money to spend are simply choosing to spend it somewhere else. And like Middlesbrough and Wigan, Newport has over twice the retail floor space per person compared to cities like Brighton and Liverpool. There is fundamentally too much retail space for the level of spending the local population can sustain, and that imbalance has been building for years. The structural problems here are layered. Spending leakage to Cardiff, significant oversupply of retail floor space, high deprivation across major parts of the city, and a weak local employment base that does not generate enough well-paid jobs to drive the footfall needed to fill those empty units. A wider recession reduces consumer spending further, and a vacancy rate at 19% has room to climb. Number 7. Wigan. Wigan tends not to attract the same national coverage as Birmingham or Nottingham, but the data puts it squarely in this group. The Centre for Cities 2025 study places Wigan's city centre vacancy rate at 16.3% in the national bottom 10 alongside Sunderland, Stoke and Birkenhead. The local economic base is built around manufacturing, logistics and retail, 3 of the sectors most exposed to automation pressure and consumer spending pullback during a downturn. When spending softens nationally, towns with Wigan's profile tend to lose retail anchors first, creating a spiral where fewer shops attract fewer visitors, pushing remaining retailers to question whether their locations still make sense. With the council under financial pressure and limited capacity to fund regeneration or backfill empty units with alternative uses, Wigan's High Street is unlikely to stabilise through a recession without deliberate intervention that the council's finances make very difficult to sustain. Number 8. Luton. Luton's story changed sharply over a few months at the end of 2024 and the start of 2025. In November 2024, Stellantis announced the closure of the Vauxhall van factory in Luton, putting around 1,100 jobs at risk.
Vauxhall has been making cars and vans here since 1905, but Luton's 120th year will be its last. The closure putting 1,100 jobs at risk after talks with unions and government ended in failure.
A factory that had been manufacturing vehicles for 120 years since 1905. The last Vivaro van came off the production line at 12:18 in the afternoon on the 28th of March 2025. The Unite Union's General Secretary called it a betrayal.
We believe there's a decision that didn't need to be made and doesn't need to be made. We're a profitable plant. We've been building 500 units a day. And we've got a good workforce. I think we need the government to step in to find what solution can be found for Luton. Otherwise, we're about to lose 120 years of history for the town.
Stellantis pointed to the UK's zero-emission vehicle mandate as the driver of the decision. Luton is not a city already in crisis the way some others on this list are. London Luton Airport directly supports around 14,000 jobs in the local economy. There is a logistics and distribution sector around the town. But removing a major manufacturing payroll that had employed generations of Luton families in an area where the claimant count was already climbing from 5.4% to 6.1% in the 12 months to March 2024 creates a meaningful hole. And Luton is one of the most densely overcrowded towns in England, with sustained pressure on housing, schools and public services well before this closure hit. A manufacturing shock of this scale, landing in that context as the wider economy softens, puts Luton in an exposed position. Number 9. Nottingham. Nottingham joins Birmingham on the list of cities whose councils have already formally hit the wall. The Section 114 notice was issued on the 29th of November 2023, when the Council's Section 151 officer reported a gross general fund pressure of around £57 million for that financial year alone. Since then, the recovery has moved slower than the Council had hoped. The government approved £66 million of exceptional financial support for 2023 to 2025. A further £35 million is being requested for the 2 years that follow. The budget gap for 2025 to 2026 is £23.3 million. Around 550 jobs were cut as part of the recovery plan. The government's own Improvement and Assurance Board, in its published final report, described Nottingham as still reliant on exceptional financial support and carrying a medium-term funding gap of £172 million. That is not a city that has turned the corner. That is a city that has stabilized at the bottom and is trying to find the energy to climb in a national economic environment that makes climbing harder by the month. Number 10. Sunderland. Sunderland makes this list on the strength of its structural numbers, but there is an important caveat that is worth understanding clearly rather than ignoring. The city centre vacancy rate is 16.8%, the 5th worst in the country. Economic inactivity sits at 24.8%, well above the national average. Only 16.6% of employment in the entire Sunderland district is located in the city centre itself, compared to 33% in Newcastle just up the road. That hollowed-out economic geography, where the city centre has been quietly emptied out while activity concentrates in out-of-town locations, is genuinely hard to reverse because it reflects deeply embedded patterns of behaviour and investment. Now the caveat. In December 2025, Nissan confirmed the start of third-generation Leaf production at its Sunderland plant, backed by a £450 million investment directly supporting 6,000 jobs on site. A fully electric Juke is planned for the second production line in 2026 to 2027, with an electric Qashqai in the pipeline after that. That is the most significant positive manufacturing commitment in the Northeast in years, and it matters enormously to the city's long-term trajectory. Sunderland is on this list because the current numbers are still genuinely challenging, but it is the one city here with the most credible industrial reason to look meaningfully different in 5 years than it does today. The key question is whether that investment holds as global headwinds intensify and the automotive industry continues its turbulent transition. So there you have it, 10 cities and a pattern that runs across all of them. High claimant counts well above the national average, city centre retail vacancy rates of between 16 and 19%, councils either already receiving exceptional financial support or having spent years hovering dangerously close to the Section 114 line. Major employer closures, removing the manufacturing anchors that once stabilized local labor markets, and levels of child poverty and economic inactivity that make clear the people most at risk from a recession are already the people with the fewest means to ride it out. None of this means these cities are finished or beyond saving. Sunderland's Nissan commitment is real and it matters. Bradford has a growing population and genuine cultural energy that, with serious and sustained investment, could turn the city around. But potential and protection are very different things, and right now, what these cities have is potential without protection. The national conversation about recession focuses on GDP figures and interest rates, and what the Chancellor said in the Commons, but the lived experience of a recession is not evenly distributed across the country. It lands hardest in the places already carrying the most weight. In the communities where the high street is already struggling, where the council is already borrowing to survive, where child poverty is already running at twice the national rate. The numbers in this video are not a prediction of inevitable collapse. They are a pattern of accumulated vulnerability that has been visible in the data for years. The question is whether the people making decisions about investment, housing, public services, and economic policy are looking at the same numbers. Because the 10 cities in this video are not waiting for a recession to arrive. For too many of the people living in them, it already feels like one has been here for a long time.